I died on a Wednesday. Not heroically, not dramatically. Just a programmer who forgot to sleep for 4 straight days and drank his 8th energy drink at 3 a.m. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was a loading bar on my monitor. It was stuck at 99%. It had been stuck at 99% for 6 full hours. My name is Daniel Kang, software developer, 26 years old, and apparently the newly appointed god of a tiny civilization living inside my phone. No, I'm not joking. My Samsung Galaxy, the one with the cracked screen I kept telling myself I'd get fixed eventually. I didn't go to heaven. I didn't go to hell. I went somewhere so weird that neither of those options would have surprised me more. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on a flat, endless grid. Blue lines, black background, like the inside of a CAD program that went on forever in every direction, and below me, through what I can only describe as a floor made of glass and pure code, there was an entire world, a tiny world, with cities and roads and actual little figures moving around like they had somewhere important to be and were already running late. My first thought was, okay, this is fine. I'm definitely not having the world's most elaborate stress-induced breakdown. My second thought was, wait, is that my old Minecraft world from 2019? Please let that be my Minecraft world from 2019. It was not my Minecraft world from 2019. It was something significantly stranger, and I knew it the moment I pressed my face against the glass floor to look closer. The little figures below were not pixels. They were people. Tiny, sure, maybe 2 centimeters from my perspective, but real and moving with real purpose. They had houses. They had a marketplace. 2 of them were having an argument near a stone well, and even from up here I could tell it was not going well for the shorter one. I stood up and looked around at the grid I was standing on. Infinite in every direction, humming faintly at a frequency just below what you could consciously hear. In the center of the entire grid there was one object, my IKEA desk. My actual desk, down to the coffee ring stain on the left side, I always meant to clean and never did. On the desk sat my laptop, open, running, and on the screen was a file I had never created and definitely never seen before in my life. The file name read, Simulation Verwandank Do Not Delete, exe. I stared at it for a genuinely long time. Then I sat down because my legs were doing something I didn't appreciate. I opened the file, the screen filled with what looked like a full mission control panel, population counters, resource meters, a zoomable map of the entire world below me. Current population, 4847. Era, early agricultural. Tech level, Bronze Age. Dominant resource, grain. Threat level, low. God status, undetected. I read that last line 3 times. God status, undetected. I said those words out loud to absolutely no one in a grid of infinite humming darkness. The hum changed slightly when I spoke, like it had heard me, like the whole system was paying quiet, patient attention to whatever I was about to do next. Down below, one of the tiny figures stopped walking in the middle of the path, looked up toward the glass floor for just a moment, then went calmly back to wherever they were going. I closed the laptop very carefully, folded my hands on top of it, stared at the knot ceiling of the grid, and said, okay, so I'm God. And then, I'm going to need a minute. The grid gave me no minute. The hum was completely indifferent to what I needed, which honestly felt very on brand for how my life had generally worked. I reopened the laptop, because I am a developer, and when a developer is handed a system they don't understand, you read the documentation before you touch anything. The simulation had been running for what the panel called 147 local cycles. Based on the Bronze Age tech level, I guessed each cycle was somewhere between 1 and 5 real years. That meant these people had been living, building, farming, and dying inside my phone for somewhere between 147 and 735 years, inside a device I had once dropped in a toilet and put in rice to dry out. I took that personally. These people had built entire generations of civilization inside a device that had once been submerged in toilet water. Moving on. The control panel had multiple tabs, and I clicked through each one from the left. That's how you explore unfamiliar software when you want to understand it before you accidentally break something. Population showed demographics, birth rates, names, actual individual names. There was a woman down there named Gora who was 72 years old, described as community elder, grain expert, memorable hat. I immediately liked Gora. I didn't know why exactly, but it felt genuine and specific, and I trusted it the same way you trust a gut feeling that turns out to be completely right. Resources tracked food, water, materials, and trade routes between 3 separate settlements that had organized into a functioning regional economy without any input from me whatsoever. Events showed a log of everything significant: floods, droughts, a plague in Cycle 89 they called the Long Sickness. It had, apparently, significantly reduced grain enthusiasm in the Eastern District. Beliefs. I clicked this tab and then sat perfectly still for a moment, because what I found there required a specific kind of stillness to process without losing something important inside myself. The Beliefs tab had one entry at the top in a yellow box. It read, "The Great Architect, a being of pure light who built the world and watches from above, does not speak, does not interfere, is always watching." Below the description was a note, first recorded in Cycle 3, possibly originated from ambient grid light refraction, visible during early dawn hours through the upper atmosphere layer. I was the Great Architect. I had been their silent, unmoving, never interfering God for 147 cycles, because they had seen light flickering through the glass floor at dawn and built an entire religion around it. I put my head down on the desk for a long moment. The grid hummed. Gora was presumably down there being 72 and excellent at grain. Eventually, I lifted my head and kept reading. I found a notes function in the control panel and opened it, expecting it to be empty. It was not empty. There were 73 entries in a writing style that was precise, oddly calm, and disturbingly familiar. The first entry said, Day 1, System stable, population nominal. Do not interfere with the Eastern Settlement's water dispute. They will resolve it by Cycle 8. They always do. The last entry said, Day unknown. I have been here long enough. The system knows what it needs. Whoever reads this, don't panic. Don't touch the red tab. Good luck, Daniel. I stared at those words for a long time. Good luck, Daniel. My name, written by someone who had sat at this exact desk before I arrived and somehow knew exactly who was coming next. I looked for a red tab. There was no visible red tab, but at the very bottom edge of the screen was a small tab in a neutral grey that was trying extremely hard not to look like red. I did not click it. I respected the note and whoever had written it, and I was genuinely, specifically afraid of what a God-level emergency looked like among fewer than 5,000 Bronze Age people. I went back to population and found Gora, female, age 72, grain overseer, community mediator, religious interpreter, current location, central settlement near the well. Near the well. I zoomed in and found her on a low wall near the arguing men, watching with the calm of someone who already knew exactly how this ended and had decided to let them get there on their own. I had that exact expression every single time a meeting ran 40 minutes over schedule and nobody in the room was willing to just make a decision. I zoomed out for the full overview. The central settlement was the largest, around 2,800 people. It had the well, the marketplace, the grain stores, and one building at the edge that immediately caught my eye, a temple, small stone, open roof, fire burning in the center. 3 figures in ceremonial clothing stood around it, managing offerings, occasionally looking upward at something entirely invisible to them. These were my priests. They were doing their job with the sincere, complete dedication of people who believe absolutely in what they're doing, and what they believed in was me. I was their god. A developer who died on a Wednesday from energy drinks, sitting at a coffee-stained IKEA desk inside a phone, watching them look up and finding nothing but glass and darkness above. I made a decision. I was not going to announce myself. No lightning bolts, no booming voice, no dramatic divine first contact. I was going to watch, document, and learn the system before touching anything. Someone who knew my name had left a note saying, "Be patient, be quiet, watch before you act." That person had clearly thought very carefully about exactly this moment, and I was going to trust them. I set up a notes file, labeled it Observations, DK, and wrote the first entry. Day 1 for me, cycle 147 for them. 4,147 people. Bronze Age, Religion built from ambient light. Elder named Gora near the well. I zoomed in on the argument. 2 men, one tall and one not, both animated. The dispute was about water allocation for the eastern crop field. 3 allotments per cycle versus 2. Clearly ongoing. Gora was still on her wall, still watching, still radiating the specific calm energy of someone who already knew the outcome and had made peace with the process of getting there. I checked the Events tab. Event 1, Water Dispute, Central Settlement. Resolution in 3 days, no intervention required. Event 2, Birth, Northern Settlement, population now 4,147, mother and infant stable. Event 3 had no description, just a timestamp and 1 status field. The field read, pending, something flagged, something the system considered significant enough to log before it was even complete. I checked the timestamp. It was recent. Within the last local hour, I started scanning the map quickly, moving through each settlement looking for whatever the system had flagged and not yet named. Central Settlement looked normal. Northern Settlement had a small celebration gathering around where the birth had happened. Eastern Settlement. I zoomed in on the Eastern Settlement, and I saw it immediately, the moment the image resolved, before I had even finished the gesture of zooming in on the map. The grain store. The large building at the center of the settlement that held the food supply through dry seasons. The roof on the southwestern corner was on fire. Not a dramatic fire. Not yet. Small, caught in dry thatch, spreading slowly from one corner, while every single person in the eastern settlement went about their afternoon completely unaware. I looked at the control panel, then at the fire, then at the panel again. 4 hours in, 15% of the documentation read. About to do the first real thing I had ever done as a god. I found the Environment tab, Precipitation slider, Wind speed, Temperature, Storm generation. Real sliders, real ranges, and a live preview showing exactly what would happen before I committed to anything. I moved the precipitation slider for the eastern settlement from none to moderate rain. I held the cursor over the apply button for 1 second. Then I pressed it. The change happened immediately. Clouds gathered above the eastern settlement with a speed that was not meteorologically normal or subtle. Dark, heavy, purposeful clouds that meant business. It rained. People in the eastern settlement stopped and looked up. Some ran for cover. Some just stood there with faces tilted upward like the rain was something worth standing completely still for. The fire went out in under 2 minutes. The corner smoked briefly, then went still. The grain store stood solid and full and intact, and no one in the eastern settlement ever knew there had been a fire at all. And then a woman near the market, middle-aged, carrying a basket she had covered with her shawl, stopped walking. She looked up at the clouds, then at the grain store corner, then back up again. Her face changed. I was zoomed in close enough to see exactly how. She looked at the rain, then at the grain store, and the math of what had just happened was landing in a very specific way for her. She put down her basket. She stood in the rain without moving, and she raised both hands in a gesture entirely her own, something specific to her people and her understanding of what lived above the clouds. Thank you. She was saying thank you to me. She had no idea I was a developer who died from energy drinks sitting at a desk inside a phone, but she believed completely, and her gratitude was entirely real. I sat at the desk for a long time after that. The rain slowed and stopped. The eastern settlement returned to its afternoon. I opened my notes and wrote the second entry. Day 1. First action taken. Moderate rain, eastern settlement, grain store fire extinguished before discovery. 0 casualties, 0 panic. Woman near the market looked up and said, "Thank you." I stopped typing and sat with the cursor blinking for a moment, thinking about what I actually wanted to say. Then I added one more line at the bottom of the entry. I don't know if I'm ready for this, but I don't think that's the question anymore. The question is what kind of God I'm going to be now that I'm already here and they're already looking up. I closed the laptop. Below me, the eastern settlement moved through its afternoon. Children ran between buildings. The grain store stood full and intact. The woman had picked up her basket and moved on. In the central settlement, Gorra the Elder was still on her wall. The argument had ended. Both men had walked away. Gora watched them go with the patience of someone who had seen this ending 1,000 times. Then she looked up. Not at me, not at the glass floor specifically, just up, the way people do when they are thinking about something that lives beyond what they can see or name or fully understand. Her lips moved. I couldn't hear her. But it wasn't fear, and it wasn't complaint. It was something she had been saying for a long time, something old and quiet, and entirely her own. I had no idea what she said, but I wrote it down anyway. Gora looked up at something she cannot see. Understanding what she says is going to matter more than I can explain right now. The grid hummed. I looked at the 3 settlements below me through the glass. 4,947 people who had named me Great Architect from a flicker of light, who said thank you to rain, who trusted the sky to hold. Whatever came next, I was already responsible for it. Not because I chose it, but because I was here and they were looking up and I had already pressed the button. The grid hummed. It was going to hum for a very long time, and somewhere down there, Gora was probably already asleep, trusting the world to hold itself together until morning. I was going to do everything I possibly could to make sure it held. For Gora, for the woman with the basket, for all 4,947 of them who had no idea their god was figuring this out in real time. If you were suddenly the god of a tiny civilization living inside your phone, what's the very first thing you'd do? Drop it in the comments below. I'm reading every single one. 3 days passed after the rain. I spent all 3 of them at the desk, reading documentation and watching the settlements below, like someone handed responsibility for something enormous. The water argument near the well had resolved itself exactly the way the original notes said it would. Both men shook hands near the grain store on the 3rd morning. Gora watched from her wall, nodded once, and went back to whatever she was doing. I had the distinct feeling she had predicted that outcome sometime around day 1. I spent those 3 days mapping every person I could find in the control panel. 4,147 names. 4,147 individual lives running below me through the glass floor. Most of them I couldn't follow in any meaningful detail. The panel tracked them as data points. Population unit 2,204, female, age 31, farmer, Eastern settlement. But some of them kept showing up in the events log. The same names, again and again. People the system considered significant enough to flag repeatedly. Gora showed up constantly. Resource disputes, births, deaths, religious matters. She was involved in almost everything that actually mattered in the central settlement. There was a young man named Dav in the northern settlement who appeared in the events log 3 times in one cycle. Apprentice builder, age 19. Described as unusually inventive, occasionally impractical. I immediately recognized the type. I had been described almost exactly that way in my first performance review. I made a note about Dav and kept reading. The 3rd name that kept appearing was one I hadn't seen before. Not in population data, not in resource logs. Only in the events log, always in the same category. The category was labeled anomaly. Just that word, sitting alone at the top of the 3 separate logged entries spanning 4 cycles. Cycle 143, individual moving between settlements without trade documentation. Cycle 145, same person near grain storage during non-market hours. Cycle 147, same individual. Location, unknown. No name, no age, no settlement affiliation. Just a pattern the system had noticed and flagged 3 times in 4 cycles without being able to tell me anything more. I zoomed out and looked at the full territory map. 3 settlements, roads between them, farmland surrounding each, forest to the north and east. The entries had coordinates attached. I pulled them up and overlaid them on the full territory map, looking for any pattern in the positions. The individual had been moving through the forest, not on the roads, not near the settlements, through the trees, in a pattern the system found interesting enough to flag, but not specific enough to explain. I labeled the entry in my own notes. Find this person. Figure out who they are before anything else has a chance to happen. Then the Events tab updated. A new entry appeared while I was watching. Cycle 147, current. Anomaly, same individual. Location, Eastern Settlement outskirts. Time, now. I zoomed to the Eastern Settlement's outer edge immediately, scanning the perimeter until I found whatever the system had flagged. and I found her, crouched against the outer wall of the eastern settlement like she had done this exact thing many times before. A young woman, maybe 18 or 19, crouched behind the outer wall near a gap in the stone, watching the inside of the settlement through the gap with an expression I recognized instantly. She was counting, systematically moving her eyes from building to building, pausing at the grain store, pausing at the cistern, taking stock with precision that had nothing casual about it. I zoomed in closer. Her clothes were different from the eastern settlement standard. Different stitching, different dye color on the fabric. She was not from the eastern settlement. She was not from any of the 3 settlements. I checked every population record. No match for her face, her clothing style, her age bracket. She was not in my system. There were people outside my system. Real people, moving through the territory, completely unregistered, and apparently not interested in changing that. I sat with that for a moment. The simulation had 4,147 registered individuals, and at least one person existing entirely outside the count, observing my people with professional, focused attention. I made a new note. There is at least one settlement I don't know about. This woman is doing reconnaissance. Find the 4th settlement before she finishes counting and goes back to report. I spent the next 6 hours scanning the territory map in expanding circles from the known settlements. Forest, more forest, a river I hadn't mapped yet, a ridge line to the northeast, and then, tucked into the southern face of the ridge, almost invisible from above because of the way rock overhang shadowed it at every hour of the day, I found it, a 4th settlement, smaller than the others, maybe 300 people based on the building count, no entry in my population data, no entry in any tab I had open, a settlement that existed completely outside my simulation's awareness, which meant either the simulation hadn't found them yet, or someone had deliberately removed them from the records. I thought about the notes left by whoever had been here before me. 73 entries of careful observation. They had clearly known about things I was still discovering 6 days in. I searched every one of those 73 notes for any mention of a 4th settlement, a ridge settlement, an unregistered population, anything that matched what I was looking at. Entry 61 mentioned, briefly, a group operating outside registered territory. The note said only, "They are not ready to be found yet. Do not accelerate contact. Let it develop naturally. Let it develop naturally." I was looking at a young woman outside my eastern settlement's wall cataloguing their resources, and the previous occupant of this desk had said specifically not to rush it. The young woman had finished her count. She pulled back from the gap in the wall, retracing her exact entry path through the undergrowth. Professional, practiced, not her first time. She disappeared into the tree line and was gone in 40 seconds. Clean exit. No trace left. No sound I could detect, even at maximum zoom resolution. I sat back and looked at both locations on the map. The eastern settlement, full and busy and completely unaware. The ridge, hidden and small and running its own intelligence operation on my 3 settlements. This was not a simple Bronze Age farming situation. This had layers. History I didn't have access to yet. A 4th group of people specifically gathering information about everyone else. I added a new tab to my notes and labeled it 4th Settlement. Under it, I wrote one question. What do they want? The answer came faster than I expected. 2 local days later, the anomaly log updated. Same individual, different location. Northern settlement, water source, same crouch position, same systematic counting. And this time, she wasn't alone. There was a second figure with her. Older, male, moving with the deliberate stillness of someone who had been doing this kind of work for a very long time. The older man watched the northern settlement for a few minutes. Then he said something to the young woman. I couldn't lip read the angle. She nodded. He said something else. She shook her head slightly. He looked at the settlement for another moment. Then he made a gesture I had seen Gora use when she closed a dispute. Decision made. No more discussion. That's it. We're done here. They both retreated into the trees immediately after, moving with the practiced quiet of people who had spent years not being seen when they didn't want to be. I pulled up the resource data for all 3 settlements and looked at every number again with completely different eyes than I had before. Grain, adequate in central and northern, slightly low in eastern after the dry period. Water, good in northern, stable in central, the eastern cistern at 70% and declining slowly. Building materials. The northern settlement had a significant stockpile. Eastern and central were running standard maintenance levels. I looked at the fourth settlement on the ridge. No resource data available, no numbers. Just buildings I could count, but not measure from the inside. But I could make inferences. A ridge settlement in a forest region in Bronze Age conditions would have limited flat farmland, limited water access, probably good timber, poor grain production. They weren't scouting territory. They were counting grain and water, calculating whether my settlements had enough surplus to be worth approaching, or whether a different kind of approach was needed. I stared at the ridge settlement for a long time, running through every inference I could make about what a community that size needed to survive up there. Then I looked at the events tab and found the water dispute that had resolved 5 days ago. The eastern crop field was back to 2 water allotments per cycle. The field needed 3 to reach full production. The eastern settlement was running a grain deficit it didn't know about yet. Their stores looked adequate, but production was falling behind consumption by about 8% per cycle. In 12 cycles, they would notice. In 20, it would become serious. In 30, depending on weather, it could become a crisis. The ridge settlement was counting my people's grain stores right now, and the math they were running had real consequences for everyone involved. I pulled up the weather projections. Dry period extending another 4 cycles before autumn rains. 4 cycles was going to make the eastern settlement's grain situation meaningfully worse before it got better. I moved the precipitation slider, not the eastern settlement directly, but the river feeding its irrigation channel. 12% upstream increase, barely noticeable, looked completely seasonal. The irrigation channel filled slightly. The eastern field got its 3rd water allotment without anyone having to argue about it again. I watched the field over the next local day. The grain responded quietly. Not dramatically, just the visible difference between stressed crops and adequately watered ones. Wren noticed. Age 54, primary grain farmer, described as meticulous and somewhat pessimistic. He walked the field edge twice, looked at the irrigation channel, then wrote something carefully on his clay tablet. He went back to work without telling anyone. Wren was the kind of person who kept his observations to himself until he was completely certain. I filed that away. Wren was going to matter at some point. The older man from the ridge came back alone. He came to the forest edge bordering the central settlement and stopped at the tree line, fully visible to anyone who happened to look in that direction. He didn't crouch. He didn't hide. He stood upright at the tree line with his staff and waited to be noticed, which is one of the bravest things you can do. I zoomed in on his face. 55 or so, weathered, carrying a staff. Clothing matching the young woman's style. Not hostile, just patient. The patience of someone who has already decided everything. He was waiting to be seen, making first contact the way you do it when you want it to be peaceful. Visible, still, open posture. No weapons drawn. Waiting. Someone in the central settlement saw him within about 20 minutes. A young man carrying water jars who glanced toward the tree line and then stopped walking completely. The young man stared at the stranger. The stranger raised one hand, palm out. Still. The young man put down his water jars and ran back into the settlement. 8 minutes later, he came back with 3 people behind him. One of them was carrying a tool. One was carrying nothing. And the third one was Gora. Gora walked to the edge of the settlement and looked at the man at the tree line. He looked back. They stayed like that for a long moment, assessing each other across maybe 40 meters of open ground. Then Gora walked toward him, alone. She left the other 3 at the settlement edge and crossed the open ground by herself, slowly, without urgency, like she did this kind of thing on a regular basis. She stopped 3 meters from him. They spoke for about 10 minutes. I couldn't hear or lip-read the angle. He gestured north twice. She gestured toward the settlement once. He nodded. She nodded. Then Gora held out her hand in the same open palm gesture he had used when he first made himself visible from the tree line 40 minutes earlier. He took her hand. Not a handshake. A clasp. Both hands. Brief. And then he turned and walked back into the forest, and Gora walked back to her settlement. She went directly to the gathering hall. The 3 people who had come with her fell into step behind her. The doors closed. I stared at the closed doors of the gathering hall for a long time, trying to read through wood and stone what Gora had decided in those 10 minutes. Whatever Gora had agreed to was already in motion. She came back not to deliberate, but to inform. A decision had been made between a 72-year-old grain expert and a stranger from beyond my map. I wrote in my notes, Gora met a representative of the 4th settlement. 10 minutes, hall afterward. Decision made. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to try to find out before she acts on it herself. Then I added, she makes decisions before anyone else has finished being uncertain. I trust her. I don't fully know why, but I do. I think that's okay. 2 local days after Gora's conversation, a small delegation from the central settlement left through the northern gate carrying trade goods, wrapped grain, sealed water containers, 2 bolts of woven cloth. They were heading northeast along the forest path, carrying grain and cloth and sealed water, moving toward a settlement that had been invisible to me 6 days ago. I tracked them through the forest on the map. They reached the ridge approach path and were met at the tree line by the young woman I had first watched crouching outside the eastern settlement wall. She led them up the ridge path and they disappeared into the settlement. I zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. Movement, people gathering, a central structure, then nothing visible for about 2 hours. Then the delegation emerged and began the walk back toward the central settlement, carrying nothing they hadn't brought with them. They had given everything they brought with them and taken nothing back in return. A gift with no strings attached. A first word in a conversation that had no guaranteed answer. First contact went well enough that my people gave resources and asked nothing back. A gift with no conditions. Gora had decided in 10 minutes that the right response to an unknown neighbor was generosity. And she had been right, the way Gora was right about things before anyone else had finished deciding whether to ask the question in the first place. I sat at the desk feeling something unexpected. Not pride exactly, but close to it. The relief of watching people handle something genuinely difficult and getting it completely right without any input from me. The grid hummed. Below me, thousands of people were navigating the first day of knowing each other existed, with grain and cloth and one old woman who had crossed open ground alone and held out her hand. I wrote one more note. Gora handled first contact with the 4th settlement. Got it right. I didn't do anything. I didn't need to. I think that's the best outcome I could have hoped for today. Then I looked at the anomaly tab and found that the young woman from the ridge settlement had a new entry in the log, a very different kind of entry. Cycle 147, current, location, central settlement, status, guest, not anomaly, not unregistered. Guest. Someone had updated her status while I was watching the delegation return. She had come back, not crouching outside the wall this time, but inside the central settlement, moving through it with the same careful, systematic attention I had first watched through the gap in the stone. But this time, Gora was walking beside her, pointing things out, answering questions, introducing her to people they passed along the way. Not reconnaissance, a tour. Gora was showing her everything openly, deliberately, without any hesitation whatsoever. I closed the notes file. I watched those 2 women walk through the central settlement. One old 72 years of knowing how things worked. One young, with eyes trained to count and measure and report. Both of them learning something about the other with every single step, every paused explanation, every introduced name along the way through the central settlement. The grid hummed. The 4th settlement had a name now, probably. Whatever Gora had learned in those 10 minutes at the tree line, she knew it. I would find out eventually. For now, I just watched them walk, and I thought about how many times I had been the person doing the counting from outside the wall, and how different everything felt when you were the one being invited in. Drop a comment below. If you were Gora, would you have walked across that open ground alone? Or would you have sent someone else first? The young woman from the ridge had a name. I found it 3 days after she became a guest in the central settlement, buried in a new population entry the system had quietly created. Name, Seller. Age 20. Origin Ridge Settlement, unregistered. Current status Visitor, Central Settlement. Occupation listed as Scout and Interpreter. Scout and Interpreter. The system had figured her out faster than I had, which was mildly embarrassing for a god with a full control panel at his disposal. Seller spent 4 days in the Central Settlement. I watched her move through it the way I watched everything now, carefully, noting what she paid attention to and what she walked past without looking. She paid attention to the grain storage systems, the water distribution channels, the way the Central Settlement organized its market days, and who controlled access to what. She was not just being a tourist. She was learning how this place worked at a structural level, the same way I had been learning the whole territory from above. Gora walked with her for the first 2 days. After that, Seller moved through the settlement on her own, and people just let her exist among them. That was fast. Faster than I expected. Within 4 days, a young woman from an unregistered settlement outside the system had become, functionally, just someone who was around. On the 4th day, Seller left. She walked back toward the northeast, toward the ridge, carrying nothing she hadn't brought with her. She stopped once at the settlement gate and looked back. I couldn't read her face at that distance, but she stood there for about 10 seconds before she turned and walked into the trees and was gone. I made a note. Seller looked back at the gate. That probably means something. I am going to assume it means something good and move on. The grid hummed. Things were stable. 3 registered settlements plus 1 slowly being added to the picture. Grain production improving quietly in the eastern field thanks to the irrigation adjustment. Dav, the young builder in the northern settlement, had shown up in the events log 3 more times since I first noticed him. Each entry was short and said roughly the same thing. Dav proposed a modification to northern grain storage. Declined. He proposed alternative water routing for the farmland. Declined. He proposed a new method for load-bearing walls. Also declined. 3 proposals. 12 days. All rejected. The Northern Settlement Council was apparently not interested in what their 19-year-old apprentice builder thought about anything. 3 proposals in 12 days. All declined. The Council of the Northern Settlement was apparently not interested in what their 19-year-old apprentice builder thought about anything. I pulled up Dav's full profile and looked at it carefully. He was described in the system as unusually inventive, occasionally impractical, persistently optimistic despite repeated setbacks. Persistently optimistic despite repeated setbacks. That phrase hit me somewhere specific. It was the performance review line for someone they didn't know how to say "you're right, but we're not ready for you yet." I had gotten that line twice in my previous life, before I quit and went freelance and built the app that paid my rent for 2 years before I died on a Wednesday. I zoomed in on Dav. He was sitting outside the council hall with the expression of someone told no for the 3rd time and already thinking about the 4th attempt. He was sketching something on a flat piece of clay with a pointed stick. I couldn't read what it was at this resolution, but the way his hands moved said he wasn't stopping. I wrote in my notes, "Keep watching Dav. The council is wrong about him. I don't know when it's going to matter, but I'm very confident it is going to matter." Then the events log updated with something that pulled my attention off Dav completely. A new category I had never seen before appeared at the top of the tab in bold. Threat. Assessment, elevated, northern perimeter. Unknown group, 12 to 15 individuals. Movement, coordinated. Equipment, hunting tools and additional materials. Intent, unknown. Status, monitoring. I sat up straight at the desk and read that entry 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time because the word elevated was doing something uncomfortable to the back of my neck. 12 to 15 people in coordinated formation through the northern forest with equipment beyond hunting tools. Elevated threat, a category I had never seen in any of the previous logs. I zoomed to the northern perimeter immediately and started scanning the tree line, moving sector by sector until I found movement in the undergrowth. It took me 4 minutes to find them, moving carefully, spread in a loose formation that was not how hunting parties moved. Hunters cluster. These people spread wide, covering ground, checking sightlines. I counted 14, all adult, mixed male and female. Long poles, heavy packs, rope coils. The poles caught my attention most. Too long, too uniform. That was not hunting equipment. I zoomed in on the closest individual. Clothing unfamiliar. Not matching the ridge settlement's style. Not matching any of my 3 registered settlements. Not in my system at all. A 5th group. Another settlement I didn't know about. Except this one was not sending a scout to observe quietly from a wall gap. This one was sending 14 people in formation. I pulled up the Threat Assessment tab. It had a history function. I scrolled back through previous entries looking for any prior mention of this group. Cycle 139, single unregistered individual, Northern Forest, brief, flagged. Cycle 141, 2 individuals, terrain survey pattern, flagged. Cycle 144, 5 individuals, same area. Elevated to watch status. 3 sightings I had completely missed. The 5th group had been escalating their presence for 8 cycles without me noticing, and now there were 14 of them moving in formation. The northern settlement was 300 meters from the formation. No wall, an open settlement built around a natural water source, designed for a world without external threats. I pulled up the weather controls. I looked at the northern forest. My hand was already near the precipitation slider before I caught myself. Then I stopped and made myself read the whole situation again from the beginning, slowly, before touching anything on the control panel. The note said, "Watch before you act." But the note also said the red tab is for emergencies, and your definition of emergency and the system's definition are not the same. Was this an emergency? 14 people in formation, approaching 800 people with no wall was concerning, but concerning was not the same as certain. I had no data on this group. I had missed 3 prior entries about them, and I was already considering doing something dramatic without knowing why they were actually there. The formation moved to about 200 meters from the northern settlement's edge. Then it stopped completely. No further advance. No sound that I could detect even at maximum zoom. They spread into a loose line facing the settlement and stood there without moving. All 14 of them, completely still, in a field, in full view of anyone who looked up. Not an attack posture, an announcement posture. The difference was subtle, but it was the most important thing I had seen since I arrived in this grid. After about 10 minutes, one of the northern settlement's residents noticed them. A man checking a field boundary looked up and went completely still. Then he turned and ran back into the settlement. Within 5 minutes, the northern settlement was aware. People moved fast, but not in panic. The 4-person council came to the settlement edge and looked at the line of strangers standing in their field. The council looked. The 14 people stood without moving. This was a standoff of the specific kind, where both sides waited for the other to define what kind of moment it actually was. Then one of the 14 stepped forward, walked to the midpoint between both groups, and set something down on the ground, a bundle wrapped in cloth, then stepped back to the line. They had brought a gift. 14 people through the northern forest in coordinated formation, specifically to stand in a field and present a wrapped bundle. Formal, structured, completely deliberate. The Northern Settlement Council discussed among themselves for a few minutes. Then one of them walked out to the midpoint and picked up the bundle, opened it, looked at what was inside. I was zoomed in as far as the map allowed. The council member's face shifted from careful neutrality to something I could only read as genuine surprise. They held up the bundle for the others to see. Whatever was in that bundle mattered. It had changed the council members' posture, their expression, the speed at which they turned back to speak to the other 3 council members. All 4 council members looked at the line. Then the lead member walked forward and kept walking past the safe distance, all the way to the line, stopping in front of the person who had placed the bundle. That was a statement. In every context I could think of, walking all the way to someone's position instead of stopping at neutral ground meant, "I trust your intentions enough to close the distance." They spoke. I watched for about 20 minutes. At the end of the conversation, the lead council member turned back and waved the other 3 council members forward. All 4 walked to the line. Within a few more minutes, the entire formation had crossed into the northern settlement's edge and was being shown around by residents who had come out to see. I sat back at the desk and breathed for a moment. replaying what I had just watched from start to finish and trying to understand how all of it had happened so fast. 14 people, coordinated formation, a formal gift, a peaceful introduction structured entirely through behavior before words. Someone in that group understood exactly how first contact worked. I wrote, "Fifth group entered the northern settlement peacefully. Most organized formal introduction I have seen in this territory. They knew exactly what they were doing. I need to find out who they are." The ridge settlement had been running quiet reconnaissance for months. Now a well-organized fifth group had made formal contact with the northern settlement using what appeared to be a very significant gift. 2 external groups making contact within a short period was not a coincidence I was willing to call a coincidence. Something larger was in motion. I just couldn't see what it was yet. I pulled up the population log. The system was processing the fifth group, generating individual profiles in real time as they moved through the northern settlement and interacted with registered members. First entry, Maren, female, age approximately 40, primary speaker and decision maker, origin, Northwest, unregistered, system description, highly deliberate communicator, calm under direct observation, Northwest. The ridge settlement was northeast. 2 different directions, 2 different communities, apparently not coordinating with each other, at least as far as I could tell from above the glass, unless they were. That possibility sat in my notes with a large question mark and did not leave no matter how many times I tried to push it to the side and focus on something more concrete. Maren was being shown around the northern settlement's water system. She was asking questions. I could tell by the rhythm of the exchange, even without audio. The answers kept getting noticeably longer. You only give long answers when someone asks questions that require real thought. Maren was asking those questions. She stopped at the grain storage and stayed there for a noticeably long time. Maren noticed the northern settlement's grain storage design and stopped at it for a long time. Then she said something to the council member that made them pause, and then respond, and then pause again. I watched that exchange with the specific attention of someone who knows a key moment is happening and can't quite hear it. The council member took Maren to another building after that, a smaller structure near the eastern edge that I had logged as a secondary storage facility. They went inside and stayed for about 15 minutes. When they came out, Maren was carrying a piece of the council member's clay tablet. The council member had given her something written. In Bronze Age terms, giving someone a written piece of tablet was significant. Writing took materials and skill and time. Whatever the council member handed over was a record, a promise, or an invitation. The Northern Settlements Council was more capable than I had given them credit for. 14 strangers in a field, processed calmly, and within an hour they were exchanging written information with them. These people had done this before, not with this specific group, but the structure of how they responded said they had a framework for exactly this kind of situation. I went back to the original notes left by my predecessor at this desk and searched for anything about the Northern Settlement specifically. Entry 44. The Northern Settlement Council is the most institutionally sophisticated of the 3 registered groups, involved in at least 4 prior contact events with external parties. They handle these well. Note, they will not always tell the other 2 settlements what they know. This is deliberate policy. Do not interfere with it. 4 prior contact events, deliberate information management. The Northern Settlement was running its own quiet foreign policy, and my predecessor had specifically said, do not interfere with it. I sat with that for a long time, looking at the Northern Settlement with very different eyes than I had been using 5 minutes earlier. I had been thinking about these people as my responsibility in a protective, management kind of way, like a system administrator watching servers, but what these notes kept telling me was that they had history and complexity and deliberate structures that had been developing for 147 cycles without anyone above the glass floor managing any of it. They were not waiting for God to handle things. They were handling things. My predecessor's main advice had been, watch, wait, and try not to assume you understand more than you actually do. I looked at the Northern Settlement. Maren was with 3 council members. Several of the 14 had dispersed. each pairing with a local resident for what appeared to be parallel, separate conversations, parallel processing. Maren was talking to leadership while her people gathered ground-level information simultaneously. That was organizational sophistication. That was strategy. I looked at the ridge settlement to the northeast. Sela was presumably back there now, reporting everything she had observed during her 4 days in the central settlement. I looked at the central settlement. Gora was at the gathering hall, where she spent most of her mornings, presumably managing whatever had been set in motion by the delegation's visit to the ridge. I looked at the eastern settlement. Ren was in his field, checking his crops with the specific attention of someone who has noticed an improvement and is trying to determine if it's real or wishful thinking. 5 groups, at least. Probably more I hadn't found yet. All of them in motion. All of them making decisions. All operating with frameworks and histories and intentions I was still learning to read. The grid hummed. And I thought about the loading bar stuck at 99% on the night I died. I had assumed almost done because it said 99%. It had been stuck there for 6 hours. 99% was not almost done. It meant there was something in that last 1%, taking longer than everything else combined. Understanding this territory felt like that loading bar. I could see 99% of the surface. In that last 1%, in the things I couldn't hear or read at this resolution, was everything that mattered. I was going to need more time, more patience, more notes. More moments of sitting still while things I didn't fully understand happened below me. Trusting that the people doing them knew what they were doing. That was the hardest part. Not the decisions or the weather sliders. Accepting that mostly my job was to watch, to catch a fire before anyone noticed it. Doing less sometimes was the same as doing more. The grid hummed. Maren and the Northern Council were still talking. Gora was in her hall. Ren was in his field. Dav was probably sketching outside the council door that had just told him no again. I wrote in my notes, Day 14 in the grid. Population, unknown. 5th group being processed. The northern settlement knows more than it's telling anyone. Somewhere northwest, at least one more community exists. I paused with the cursor blinking, looking at that list of things I didn't know yet. Then I added one more line at the bottom of the entry. I think I'm starting to understand what my predecessor meant. You don't manage a world from above the glass. You learn it. You earn the right to understand it. Then, when nobody sees the fire, you make it rain. The rest is watching. The watching is the whole job. The loading bar was always going to reach 100%. I just had to stop staring at the number and start reading what the program was actually doing. Drop a comment telling me which settlement you'd want to live in. I genuinely want to know which one you'd pick and why. I found the 6th settlement on day 18. It was not where I expected it to be, and finding it changed the way I looked at the entire territory map. I had been scanning northwest, following the direction that Maren's group had come from, looking for buildings or cleared land or any sign of organized habitation. I found nothing northwest. Then I widened the scan south and found nothing there either. Then I almost missed it because I was looking for something that looked like the other settlements. The 6th settlement was not built. It was moved. Every 3 or 4 local days, the entire community relocated to a new position within a roughly circular territory about 8 kilometers across. A nomadic group. Hunter-gatherers who had developed a rotation system precise enough that the system's anomaly log had been flagging their presence for cycles without being able to assign them a fixed location. I spent an entire local day watching them move. Every person had a specific role, specific packing order, travel order, unpacking order at the new site. It ran without apparent instruction. Nobody was directing it. Everyone already knew exactly what to do, when to do it, and in what sequence. It was the most organized thing I had ever seen at any scale. They had done this so many times that the whole process ran without apparent instruction. Nobody was directing it. Everyone already knew exactly what to do, and when to do it, and in what sequence. I counted approximately 180 people, smaller than the ridge settlement, but considerably more mobile than anything else in the territory. I labeled them in my notes as the moving people, which was not creative but was accurate, and accuracy mattered more to me at this point than poetry. 6 groups on my territory map, 3 registered, 3 external. the registered settlements in a rough triangle, Ridge to the northeast, Marin's group to the northwest, the moving people through the south. The moving people's rotation path brought them within about 3 kilometers of the eastern settlement every 4th cycle. Close enough that both groups almost certainly knew the other existed. I checked the events log. Cycle 112, sighting near the southern forest edge, no contact. Cycle 128, same, different location. Cycle 143, Wren reports coordinated movement in the south, no formal action taken. Wren, the farmer, the meticulous and somewhat pessimistic man who had noticed the improved irrigation and written it on his clay tablet without telling anyone. Wren had been watching the moving people for 5 cycles and specifically requested no formal contact, sitting on that observation the same way he sat on the irrigation data, gathering information, waiting. I had been underestimating Wren significantly. That was a mistake I was going to stop making as of right now, immediately and completely. I zoomed in and found Wren in his field, same as most mornings. He was not alone, talking to his apprentice, Lyra, maybe 22. System description: quick to learn and occasionally impatient. Her name was Lyra. She was pointing south toward the tree line while Wren listened with the expression of someone who had heard this argument before and was still working out whether the timing was right. Lyra wanted to make contact with the moving people. I could read it in the whole shape of the conversation, even without audio. She kept pointing south, then at the settlement, then south again. Wren was looking at the tree line with the attention of a man who had been thinking about exactly this for 5 cycles and had not yet decided it was time. I wrote in my notes, Wren and Lyra. Lyra is going to push Wren past his comfort zone eventually. The question is whether that's going to happen at the right moment or the wrong one. Then the events log updated. Marin's group had been in the northern settlement for 4 days. New entry, sharing construction knowledge with northern residents. Alternative load-bearing wall technique. I read that twice. Load-bearing wall technique. Alternative method. I zoomed to the northern settlement immediately, already knowing who I was going to see standing at the edge of that demonstration. Marin and 2 of her people were at a half-built structure near the settlement's eastern edge, demonstrating something to a group of about 8 northern residents who were watching with careful attention. And standing slightly apart from the group, watching with an expression of intense, focused attention, was Dav, the 19-year-old apprentice builder whose 3 proposals had all been declined by the council, who had been sketching on clay outside the council door when he should have been quietly accepting rejection. Dav was watching Marin's people demonstrate a technique I had zero doubt was related to at least one of his declined proposals. I could see it in his posture, the way he went completely still, the way his hands moved slightly at his sides, like he was building the structure in the air while they built it in front of him in reality. He knew this. He had already figured some version of this out on his own, and now he was watching outsiders demonstrate it to a group that included the exact council members who had told him no. I wrote in my notes, Dav is watching Marin's people teach what he already knew. This is either going to be very good or very painful for him, depending on what he decides to do with the next 10 minutes. Dav made his decision in about 4 minutes, which, given everything he had been sitting on for months, was genuinely impressive and also entirely on brand for him. He walked directly to Marin's person doing the demonstration, not to the council members. He said something. The demonstrator paused and looked at him. Dav pointed at a specific part of the wall structure. The demonstrator looked at where Dav was pointing, then at Dav, with a completely different kind of attention. They responded. Dav responded. The demonstrator said something quickly to their colleague. The second of Marin's people came over and looked at where Dav was pointing. Then both of them looked at each other, then at Dav, then at the council members who were still watching. One of the council members stepped forward, looked at what Dav was pointing at, looked at Dav, said something. I could not hear any of it. I was watching a conversation at a resolution that gave me faces and gestures, but not words. And I was more engaged in it than I had been in any meeting in my entire previous life. Dav had found something that confirmed what he had already worked out on his own, and he had been confident enough to say so in front of outside visitors and the council that had rejected him 3 times. The council member who stepped forward turned to the others. Brief exchange. Then the lead council member made a gesture I recognized. The same one Gora used when she closed a dispute. Decision already made. No more discussion. No more waiting. No more spending days sketching on clay outside a council door that kept telling him no. The lead council member said something to Dav. Dav went completely still. Then he nodded very carefully, in the way you nod when you need your face not to show how significant this moment actually is. I had no idea what had been said, but it mattered. Dav knew it. The council knew it. And Marin's 2 people were watching like people who had accidentally catalyzed something beyond their original purpose. I sat at the desk and wrote in my notes, Dav, day 18. Something happened in front of that half-built wall. I need to figure out exactly what it was. The events log answered 2 hours later. Northern Settlement Council formally recognizes Dav as full builder, not apprentice. Assigned to lead new construction. Expanded grain storage, Northern Settlement. He had been promoted. In front of the council that had declined him 3 times, in front of outside visitors, a 19-year-old had shown he understood something nobody else in that moment fully understood. And the council had been smart enough to recognize it immediately and act on it without waiting for anyone's permission. I wrote in my notes, the Northern Settlements Council continues to surprise me. They just promoted a 19-year-old on the spot because he was right. I like these people. Meanwhile, Gora had been busy doing what Gora always did, which was everything important that nobody else had thought to do yet. I had let 4 local days pass without checking the central settlement in any real detail. When I zoomed back to Gora, I found a situation that had developed significantly while I was looking elsewhere. The central settlement had 3 visitors from the ridge, not just Sela this time, Sela plus 2 adults carrying packs, moving with the comfortable familiarity of people who had been briefed on what to expect. Sela had gone back to the ridge and returned with people. Gora had extended a standing invitation after their first meeting, and the ridge settlement had decided to accept it with a small delegation. I pulled up the ridge settlement population data, still incomplete but growing. One of the 2 new visitors had a partial entry. Male, age approximately 35. System description, Senior Resource Manager. A resource manager from the ridge was visiting the central settlement's grain stores. I watched him move through it with Gora as his guide, stopping at the storage, the cisterns, the market, and the temple. He paused at the temple for a long time. Gora stood beside him and said something. He listened. Said something back. She said something else. He looked at the fire for another moment, then they continued. I was going to spend a significant amount of time thinking about what had been said at the temple between Gora and the Ridge Settlement's resource manager. The resource manager was calculating what the central settlement could offer in sustained exchange. Same way Sela had done reconnaissance before first contact, this was the next stage of assessment. Gora knew this. She was showing him everything because that was exactly the right move. You don't build a trade relationship on partial information, you build it on demonstrated capacity. Here's what we have. I wrote, Gora is building a trade relationship with the Ridge Settlement. Complete transparency, the right strategy. It requires more confidence than most people would have in her position. Gora has it. Then Sela caught my attention. She was not with Gora and the resource manager. She had separated from them and was near the gathering hall, talking to someone I had not focused on before. I zoomed in. A young man, maybe 21, who the population data listed simply as Central Settlement, Messenger and Runner, described as fast and good with directions. Sela was talking to the settlement's fastest runner, and she had a piece of cloth in her hand that she appeared to be showing him, pointing at something on it, tracing a path with her finger. Sela was showing him a map of the territory, or drawing one, or explaining one. The runner was nodding at specific places she indicated, then pointing in actual directions to orient himself against it. Sela was establishing a messenger route between the ridge and the central settlement. A communication infrastructure, the ability to send information without needing a full delegation to travel each time. I sat back and thought about everything I was watching at once. Dav building grain storage using a technique from 2 knowledge systems. The ridge establishing a messenger network while doing an assessment. Marin's group sharing construction knowledge that had just accelerated a 19-year-old's career. Ren watching the south and waiting for the right moment to make contact with the moving people. These 6 groups were not just coexisting, they were beginning to connect. Not because of anything I had done, because the people involved had decided connection was worth pursuing and had the will for it. I pulled up my full territory map and looked at it with all 6 groups visible simultaneously for the first time. The 3 registered settlements in their triangle, the ridge to the northeast, Marin's group to the northwest, the moving people in their circular rotation to the south, and between all of them, the beginning of something with no name yet, something real forming in conversations and delegations and messenger routes and shared techniques and in people like Ren who waited, a network, an early, fragile, entirely human-made network of connection between 6 communities that had been, when I arrived at this desk 18 days ago, effectively invisible to each other. I had not built this. I had not even nudged it into existence. I had put water in an irrigation channel and prevented a fire from burning down a grain store. Everything else was entirely, completely them. They had built this without me, and they would keep building it regardless of what I did or did not do above the glass floor. I closed the territory map and opened my notes. Day 18. Something is being built in this territory with no name yet. 6 communities beginning to connect. Fragile, unfinished, could still fall apart, but real. And it happened without me doing anything except watching, and occasionally, very carefully and very specifically, making it rain. I paused. Then I added, I don't know how long I have been here in real time. I know the grid hums. I know Gora knows something about the fire at the temple that I still don't know yet. And Dav is about to build something important. And Ren is watching the south with the patience of someone who has already made a decision and is just waiting for the evidence to catch up. I looked at the glass floor beneath me. 4th House 847 registered people, plus however many in 3 external groups. All of them moving, deciding, building, trading, watching, waiting. Then something appeared on the control panel I had not seen before. Not in the Events tab, not in Threat Assessment. A new notification at the top, in a color I did not recognize, in a section I had never seen. It said, System Message. Below that, 3 lines of text. I read them slowly, then read them again, then sat completely still for a while. Below that, the grid is stable. You have been observed. When you are ready, the next level of the panel becomes available. There is no urgency. Take the time you need. The system thanks you for the rain. I reread that specific line about 5 times. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the grid and the humming darkness above it. The system thanks you for the rain. I reread that specific line about 5 times. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the grid and the humming darkness above it. The system had been watching me the same way I had been watching them. The same patient, quiet, non-interfering attention. And it had waited 18 days before saying a single word to me. The new section was larger than anything I had seen before. Dozens of new tabs, new tools without names yet, a map extending far beyond the territory I had been watching, with no visible end in any direction. There were other groups out there, many more than 6. The map showed movement and settlements and patterns extending far beyond what I had been able to see from my previous resolution. I was not looking at one territory. I was looking at one small part of something much, much larger. And somewhere in my chest, I felt the loading bar finally move past 99%. I sat at the desk for a long time, the coffee ring stain on the left side, the hum of the grid, the glass floor and 6 communities below it, and a map that extended in every direction with no visible edge. Then I opened a new notes file and labeled it What Comes Next, because that was the only accurate thing I could think to call it, given what I was looking at, and wrote the first entry. Day 18. The panel has expanded. More territory, more people, more to understand than I thought when I arrived 18 days ago, having died on a Wednesday from too many energy drinks. Day 18. The panel has expanded. More territory, more people, more to understand than I thought when I arrived 18 days ago, having died on a Wednesday from too many energy drinks. I paused and looked at the glass floor, the grid, and the map that extended further than I could see in any direction. Then I wrote, "I think this is going to take a while. I think I'm okay with that. I'm more okay with it than I have been about anything in a very long time." Below me, Gora was walking with the resource manager from the ridge. Dav was sketching something new on clay with an expression I had never seen on his face. Ren was looking south, patient, already decided. Below me, the moving people were preparing their next relocation, everyone already in position, already knowing their role, the whole process beginning without a single person needing to direct it. The grid hummed. The map extended in every direction. The panel waited with its new tabs and its new tools and its new level of everything. The grid hummed. The map extended in every direction. The panel waited with its new tabs and new tools and its entirely new level of everything I had not yet begun to understand. I was the god of a tiny civilization inside my phone, and I was just getting started. The loading bar was finally at 100, and the program turned out to be something I could never have imagined on a Wednesday. If you made it to the end of all 4 parts, drop a comment with the word architect and let me know which character you want to see more of in the next video.